Welcome to the Navigating the Product Operating Model live stream. Let's take a trip in the time machine back to 2006. In 2006, I was leading an engineering organization where calling it a feature factory would have been a compliment. We were struggling, to be honest. We were struggling to deliver with any sort of predictability. Our quality was, I wouldn't say horrible, but it left a lot of room for improvement. There was a QA engineer on my team that was really great at finding crazy defects in the last minute. And I jokingly told the QA director at the time, why not send him home? Send him to the beach. Let us get through this final regression cycle, final hardening week without any additional regression defects. Only jokingly, right? But it was tempting. This whole cycle of we build something and we learn too late that thing is not really working, and it takes us time to test again and to see what is going on. It was a problem. So our first hope was to become a feature factory. What does that look like? So our thinking was, how can we actually, first of all, improve quality? So we started to think about what was the cause of those quality problems. The cause was that quality was expensive. We were tempted to release with quality issues, and sometimes we released with quality issues because it was so expensive to fix it. It was this sort of flywheel going in the other direction. The harder it is to run your regression cycles, the harder it is for you to close feedback loops, the less often you do them, the harder they become. The first Agile practice we introduced was actually continuous integration. Continuous integration was this practice where you integrate much more frequently, you learn about quality issues much faster. It's harder in the beginning. It feels like you're trying to turn a flywheel in the beginning. It's very hard to get it going. But once it gets going, once you can run the integration more frequently and find the defects the day you introduce them, and later on, maybe with simulators, even the moment you introduce them, minutes after you write the code, then you get addicted to it. You get addicted to the speed of feedback. A feature factory is where you become good at delivering. Hi, Josh. Welcome. Feel free to jump in and we can have a chat about product operating models, or you can just listen in to me talking about the journey through feature factories.
Yeah, I'm loving it. I'm listening for now. This has been a topic that I've been interested in for probably 7 or 8 months or so. I've really been big in the Scaled Agile framework, and then some things changed, and I've read a couple of the product operating model books and things and started to realize they're not unsimilar. There's a lot in common here. So I started to see your LinkedIn messages, and in my office here, I'm just cheering, saying, this is what we need. This is the blend of two really exciting approaches, two really sound approaches. So I'm listening for now, but this is something I'm passionate about. So thanks for the invite, and I'll certainly jump in.
Cool. Feel free to. So let's reset for a second. Feature factory. What is a feature factory? What were we aiming at back in 2006? We were aiming to be able to build something, for it to work, to take features from a backlog, to be able to design, to build them, to iterate through them, so that when we release, that feature is working. And that's a huge improvement compared to what we had before. But it's obviously not enough. Over the next years, I help organizations build more and more feature factories and deal with a lot of quality issues and implement continuous integration and improve predictability and transparency. At some point, what we started to realize was, even when you have a good feature factory, you're not necessarily succeeding as a business. Even when you deliver the features that product marketing or product management was sure you need to deliver, or was even, when you have a roadmap, a contract of sorts with your business, and as the engineering organization or the product organization, you're able to deliver those features, it's not clear that you'll succeed. There were too many times where those features that we worked so hard to deliver were duds upon delivery. We couldn't really see a difference in how the product was selling or in customer delight, which is what we should have been aiming for. The fact that you're building something and you're focused on building it the right way, and you're not necessarily thinking about, are you building the right thing? There isn't anything new in this concept, if we're honest about it. If you look at the Scrum product owner is supposed to be maximizing value. They're not supposed to be managing stories. But the thing that happened is that organizations took a lot of effort to build their feature factories and had to take a rest. There's a limited amount of change energy that organizations can invest in something. There's a limited amount of time that you can be focused on a transformation. If a CIO or a CTO puts their flag on, I want to go and deliver this transformation, at some point, it runs out of energy. If you did a project with a big consulting firm that they sold you onto an Agile transformation, at some point, everybody has the interest to declare success, to celebrate we achieved something, and move on. The problem is that what we celebrate where we stopped is either of two things. One is worse than the other. The good news is if you're a feature factory, if you're actually able to at least deliver with predictability, quality, and speed. The bad news is if you stopped with the theater. And in many organizations, that's where they stop, because even a feature factory is in many cases hard. I worked with a company that was building customer relationship management systems, invoicing systems for the biggest telcos in the world. And the portfolio of products that this company was managing for its customers had dozens of complex systems. Integrating those systems to the point that you can actually see whether you broke something or whether a feature is working was something that took 2 weeks. Getting continuous integration working in that environment required millions of dollars of investments and some of the best powerhouses of figuring out how to optimize automation and builds to make it something that works in an hour. So you can imagine that when this organization managed to actually get to continuous integration, to get to the fact that they're a feature factory, they were out of breath. They didn't have the energy to take it to the next level. And a lot of the time, even a feature factory might require you to make changes in your engineering organization, in your technology. But getting beyond the feature factory to be an empowered product organization requires more than that. I'm working with an organization right now that's implementing a scaled Agile framework-based product operating model. And what we see there is pretty common in the industry. The technology organization is much more engaged in this process. They have a strong conviction that they need to undergo an Agile product transformation. The business is interested, but doesn't have the same level of conviction. And what that causes is a situation where there are interesting conversations on who should own those products. Who can we really empower to be both aligned to what's strategic for the business and be empowered to experiment, to talk to our customers at the right altitude, to figure out which features should we be building, which products should we be building, how do we actually drive towards our strategy. If your product organization is not really engaged in these conversations, if your transformation was driven by a technology organization, the best case you can hope for is a feature factory. And the problem is that even today in 2025, there are many organizations that are not classic technology companies, that are tech-enabled companies that don't even have a real product organization. They might have people called product owners. They might have people called product managers. Those people are coming from a strong technology background, which means they have a couple of things that are obstacles for them. One is they're subject matter experts in the technology, which means people look at them at that. They could become great product managers, but it's a journey. And also their business organization is seeing them as still as technologists. It's not really seeing them as a product organization. The business takes time to trust and empower a product organization. Creating a product organization in an organization that doesn't have it is not easy, as we can see.
So in your opinion, in your experience, you're equating, I think I'm hearing, you're equating the origin of the journey, the involvement of the business, the involvement of the, probably the best place for product and marketing to reside, right? Not in the technology organization. You've seen that quite often lead to feature factory. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I'd agree. There's a good correlation, and it's only anecdotal, but in my experience, there's a good correlation between feature factories and organizations that don't have a strong history as a product organization. But
just to expand on that, this one is interesting, and I hadn't thought of it that way. And by golly, it makes a lot of sense. And so now when I envision the scaled Agile framework roadmap, and I'm not here to say someone's right or someone's wrong, but I'm wondering if maybe we can refactor that a little, because that kind of puts product management and Agile product management, because I always think of POPM class as the science of product management, and APM class is the art of product management, lowercase a, right? It's more the art form of it. I'm thinking that's more important now. Getting product managers to truly not just understand features, epics, stories, things like that, but to truly understand, you're looking at opportunities. You're looking at leading indicators. You're looking at market disruptors. You're looking at trends and all those other things. That way, you're not focusing on a dead problem. You could be solving something that somebody else is already getting rid of. Things like that. That's a perspective I hadn't thought of. I'm liking that.
I'd agree, regardless of if you look at the SAFe product ownership versus product management classes, if you look at the scrum.org's different classes, there's advanced product ownership, or you might call it product management, then more, there's this separation in the market where initially you become a product owner in a feature factory. That's like the base level of product ownership. I'm not sure there's a way to jump over that.
Oh,
I think we're trying, when I teach a product owner's class, whether it's a SAFe class or a scrum.org class or just coaching product owners, I try to talk about validation and value and experimentation. And I try to jump into being an empowered product owner and empowered product team. And I think most scrum.org trainers do the same these days. Not sure that I can say the same about what's going on in the SAFe world, but let's not digress. If we meet product owners that come from being a BA or an engineering manager, it's hard for them to see themselves being an empowered product owner. It's hard for the project manager becoming a scrum master for the first time to think of themselves as coaching the organization and the ecosystem. Likely that they'll be thinking about how can I facilitate the daily scrum and how can I plan a sprint. And we need to understand that. And I think what I'm trying to say is I understand why there are some pundits in the product world that are spreading fear, uncertainty, and doubt and toxic messaging about Agile, Scrum, product owners. I understand why they're doing it. They have their own interests. And I understand we need to go beyond the feature factory and what most organizations are currently doing with Scrum, SAFe, Kanban, whatever. What I'm trying to convey is the message that we're building on the shoulders of giants. It will be impossible to build an empowered product organization without first being a feature factory. That's the point that I'm trying to convey. And if your organization is not even a feature factory, then work on that. And one good reason for that is if your teams are teams that still deliver components and not even features, it will be almost impossible to create an empowered product team. Your technology, your architecture would not support it. The knowledge of the people would not support it. It's a big gap. It will be impossible to steer with evidence if your teams don't continuously create working stuff that generates this evidence. If you don't have continuous integration, you cannot be an empowered product organization. So back to the feature factories, the main issue is that organizations stay stuck with them. I like the buzz around product operating models. I like it because this helps product and technology leaders see through the distortion field of the feature factory and the Agile theater. It helps us re-energize organizations to look for the sort of things that we as Agilists, as real Agilists, have always talked about.
You're right, though. It does a very good job of bringing vivid life to the real mission of product, the real abstract stuff, and reinforcing that Agile's fast feedback is so critical at every piece, up to and including defining your opportunity, right? If your feature was defined 6 months ago and you're building it today, that's probably not okay. If that feature was truly envisioned and your acceptance criteria have been static for half a year, you probably need to revisit, is this still the best way to solve that opportunity?
Mhm.
You're right. I think the product operating model reinvigorates that energy or that spirit.
You know what it reminds me of? When I was helping bring Kanban into the Scrum.org world, into professional Scrum, I taught a lot of professional Scrum with classes, including hardcore Scrum practitioners and trainers. One of the interesting dynamics was how Kanban reinvigorated some of the core principles of Scrum. Like, it's not necessarily just the things we introduced with Kanban, like flow. It's the perspective of flow that Kanban provided made practitioners look at Scrum differently. They started to see the sprint cycle much more pooling and shaping demand to capacity. And it was much more about the speed of feedback and empiricism than planning and story pointing and burn down charts and all that stuff that we, over the years, turned much too much attention towards. And I hope, and I already see this in my practice, but I hope it spreads further. I hope that what happens when we apply, we're focused on outcomes, a focus on speed of feedback, on steering with evidence. When we use the product operating model to apply these lens to SAFe, let's say, to the Scaled Agile framework and how organizations practice it, it would help us reimagine or remember, to be honest, what all of this should be about. I see already how it is helping teams look beyond the practices and the mechanics of, let's say, PI planning towards what are we really trying to accomplish here. Look back principles. If you look at the SAFe principle, there is not much more that you need in order to implement a product operating model that's not already there in the principles. It doesn't introduce new thinking.
I agree.
It introduces new energy. It gives an excuse to CIOs and transformation leaders and the big consulting firms, an excuse to refocus attention somewhere and take that next step.
I like the comparison to Kanban and Scrum. Kanban's built on all the same principles, not as structure heavy, if you will, not as rigid in so many things. And so I see what you mean. That can really bring back the energy of Agile, right? The energy of prioritization, WIP limits, the standard things that we agree we want to do, the things that we value more.
To be honest, I don't think anything is going to bring back the energy of Agile. I think Agile is beyond repair in some ways. Unfortunately, I don't think anything is wrong with the principles, but there's a lot wrong with the ecosystem, what you might call the industrial complex around it.
Although I wonder if that's a team-to-team kind of thing. At scale, that could still be tough. But I wonder if within a team, all those things that we value from Agile, regardless of what word we use.
Oh, I agree with that.
Yeah,
Definitely. The uppercase Agile is beyond repair, I think. There are still environments where people don't care about what's going on in LinkedIn, and the developers don't hate it that much, and they don't listen to the Silicon Valley product group's perspectives on Agile. There are many environments where that's still the case, but I would say the mainstream is going beyond uppercase Agile. What I'm trying to figure out is what is the right language to continue to drive the agility principles. Because I don't think anything is broken with what's inside. It's just that Agile inside lost its value. So,
yeah, no arguments here. That's agreed. My question might have derailed you. I apologize if it did. But that was valuable.
I was here for questions. What I'm trying to do here is build a flywheel of let's have conversations about these things. The more conversations, the more I can repurpose into content. The more content, the more people would show up. It's a flywheel. It's hard to push it in the right direction in the beginning, but I hope there's room in the community around this for this sort of thinking, still trying to figure out what's the right way to spread it.
I think so. And you brought up principles, and I'm going to geek out for a little bit on principles. The book that I just finished, Change Enthusiasm, she brings up a quote. Cassandra Worthy brings up a quote from Roy E. Disney. And I think the quote is something like, it's not hard to make decisions if we know our values. In my history, I've done like improv and things like that. And you can't make on the spot decisions unless you know the values of the character you're playing. So to your point about values and principles, and adding in that we as humans get to choose to apply those values and principles, right? Because that's what actors do. Actors, when they're in a scene, they do things not the way they would do it, but the way their character would do it. So they have to stop and think, what would X do? Those values and principles, you're right, not only are they still sound, but there's evidence everywhere that just using those to make the decisions will give us that perfect blend of product and scale and agile and just flexibility. So like you said, forget about the uppercase A word, flexibility, right? The agile side, or that term.
I guess the question is, how do you scale operating through principles? That's the $1 million question.
Right.
Can McKinsey teach an organization to make decisions based on principles? I don't know that they care. That's part of the problem. They care about their paycheck, but can we figure out a way to change an organization to operate through principles? I don't know that I've found a good way to do that. I think Kanban, by the way, is an interesting case study in that, because Kanban is much more principles oriented and much less practice oriented. So by design, what I've seen in organizations which I've coached using Kanban is they make a lot of decisions that are aligned with the values and principles that we're trying to promote, even without a concrete mechanic that supports that. I don't know, maybe it's not too late to reimagine SAFe to be something like that.
Yeah, I'm tracking that too. Now, Kanban specifically, and again, stop me if we get to something that you would rather cover something else. Kanban specifically, in my opinion, and I would love your opinion in return, Kanban, I think, can produce some environments where that predictability world where some folks really want to be is a little harder. That being said, I think no matter where we look, the evidence says, when you talk about predictability, when you talk about high integrity commitments, I think is how Marty Kagan puts it and Teresa Torres put it, you shouldn't have a whole system full of high integrity commitments. And so maybe that's the secret sauce with Kanban. It's, okay, if you're looking at predictability as this group, this feature factory, they have planned 52 features over the next X amount of weeks. I would like to know that all of those things are handled. Or is the most important thing, we've got 4 or 5 high integrity commitments in here. I need predictability on those. Kanban, bring me that with your expedite lanes, with your prioritization. And it's okay if some of the other stuff moves to accommodate our high integrities, because you all at scale are going to be having that conversation. Before team 3 launches into something that they're going to arrive at alone, the other teams have told them, look, we're not getting to that. And so don't venture into that alone. Do something else that you can do without scale. Maybe that's where Kanban really fits in my head anyway. As far as predictability goes, it's shrinking what is truly required from a predictability perspective. Those are our higher integrity commitments. And the others, it's okay if our evidence, as you say, that evidence along the way starts to give us a predictability, whether or not it's the end of this 12-week increment or not.
So if you look at it, my view on Kanban and predictability, I can look at it a couple of different ways. One is there's nothing that is stopping us to manage a roadmap with Kanban. The only thing that is different, let's say you're doing Kanban without having a Scrum sprint cycle, is that you don't have that predictability at the sprint boundary. I'd argue that most product organizations don't really care about the sprint boundary from a predictability perspective. The predictability around the sprints is us as agilists, us as project managers, us as people that are coming from traditional project management, trying to manage in an agile world. We don't really care about, what we finish each sprint from the perspective of external predictability. The only reason we should care about that is in order to learn and plan better. And in my view, the best reason, the most important reason to become more predictable and learn your throughput or velocity, whatever your preference at the sprint by sprint level, is to avoid overloading yourself, to learn what is your energized, sustainable pace. From a market perspective, it's more around feature predictability. Feature predictability is not a sprint by sprint thing. anyhow. So you could do that with Kanban and you can ignore that with Kanban. Another piece is, like you're saying, there's this power that you have with the fact that you're managing a predictable flow that allows you to make choices around, there's this interesting opportunity here. Now I'll pull it in and I'll work on it, even if it pushes something else out that is not time driven. David Anderson used to talk, maybe still talks about the lean decision filter, which connects nicely to that notion of making decisions from values. The lean decision filter talks about value is more important than flow, which is more important than reducing waste. So let's start from the end. Reducing waste is important, right? We want to reduce the amount of work in progress that we have. We want to reduce waste in the system. But if we reduce waste too much, if we go to too little inventory in the system, every time somebody gets blocked, we might hurt our flow. So sometimes we actually allow ourselves to have some work in the queues so that we have good flow. You can see that every time you go to the doctor. What are they optimizing for? They're not optimizing for reducing waste in the system. They're not optimizing for minimum amount of time that you spend in the clinic. What they're optimizing for is flow. They're optimizing for the doctor's utilization. So they're willing to bring in more people, and you will sit in the room and you will wait for the doctor because the doctor is the constraints. Frustrating, but that is what it is. So in the case of a development team, we're willing to have some work that is refined and ready. We're willing to have some features that we've analyzed and they're waiting for us. We would not use one-piece flow because development work is complex work. Any complex work has variability. We're willing to have some WIP in the system to buffer for that variability. Okay, so we've established flow. Is it always important to... Is flow always the most important thing? What happens when flow is the most important thing? Sometimes you see those teams that use a definition of ready, and they say, we cannot pull something into our sprint unless it's bulletproof, unless it's ready. What Eli Goldratt called full kit. Applied to PI planning? No, we're not willing to talk about this in our PI planning because the feature is not ready. We don't have all of the starter stories. We don't have everything that we need. Let's talk about it in the next PI. I used to call it the Scrum soup Nazi or the safe soup Nazi. You don't have ready features, come back next PI. What does that do? That maintains flow. Our flow metrics will be good because we will have good flow times, we would have good throughput, we would have good predictability. Luckily, we don't have any metric that shows us value, but the value will suck. The value might be that thing that is not ready, that would actually, we would need to flail a bit to work on it, but the right choice would be to sacrifice a bit of flow, create some waste because we'll spin our cycles. It will be hard to do PI planning. We might even learn during the PI. God forbid, maybe we even need to change the scope during the PI if something comes up. But that would be value over flow. A lot of the time, what you see when you work with practitioners that are just starting, especially if they are a feature factory, is they're not willing to make those changes. They don't even think that way.
So I just, two things. Okay, I'll go to the second one first because this one is interesting. For me, you just connected something in my head that I've not connected before, which is weird because I'm about to say something I think everybody said. When you prioritize flow over value, in a way, you're going risk zero. Hold on, there's a couple things in there I can't control, right? That's not me. That prevents flow. That slows flow. One could say the team is risk averse. And I think we've all heard that. But it makes me now think of, this is a world of leading indicators versus objectives. Makes me wonder if teams that habitually have low quantities of risk are prioritizing flow over value because their risk quantity is low. And so now teams might go, hold on, I don't document all my risks. Aha, that's a different question. But that's the point, right? We can't see them, so we can't help you. People don't know. Makes me wonder if there is a correlation or even a causation in there somewhere of teams or teams of teams that habitually have very low risk counts, if it's because they're prioritizing flow over value. And I wonder if then there is on a single number line a relationship between quantity of risks and value. I don't know. I'm throwing it out there. I had never thought of that until you just put that line together of value over reducing waste with your explanation.
So I'm recalling Used to work with this client in the telco space back in Israel way 15 years ago, probably, maybe 16.
Versatile Telecom, you're speaking my heart language. Just continue.
Okay. They were big in the voicemail systems world. You might know the company that I'm talking about.
Point?
No,
I'm trying to
starts
think.
with a C. Israeli company starts with a C.
How is this not coming? I can remember in 2000 through 2003, I'm standing in a telecom operations center. I can picture the voicemail box in the back of the central office. I just can't. It's not coming to me. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's bugging me.
Yes. Ask Perplexity or ChatGPT later on.
All right.
For telco companies in Israel, there are two companies, two big companies that you might come up with. One starts with a C, one starts with an A. I coached both of them on it.
Yeah.
So I had a conversation with the VP in charge of developing the voicemail box. And he was saying, listen, we're very predictable. We deliver our projects on time. We don't really need Agile from his perspective. Why was that? Because they managed to buffer for all of the risks. They managed to say, listen, we are not willing to change our plans. First of all, we buffer for all of the risks. We build plans that have learned from all of the risks of the past, and now things take us longer and longer. But also, if the customer comes with something that is valuable to them while we are in a release cycle, we would be the soup Nazis. We would say, no, come back next release. There was a similar scenario in that other company, and it's not anything new. That was the way we've been doing things. The way we've learned as engineering leaders, as IT leaders, to sleep well at night is to fix scope. Fixing scope was the only chance to maintain flow. It's simply not enough in order to be competitive. And he was realizing even at the time that, yeah, in order to start to compete against some of the rising competition from Asia and what the telco companies were starting to do at the time, a new version of iPhone every year and new things that are coming up, and voice mailboxes are suddenly not enough. You need to be more innovative than that. The pace of change is different. And I think that goes back all the way to the feature factory. A feature factory is simply not enough in order to be competitive and win these days. You need to be willing, first of all, to interrupt your feature factory and do special orders and change direction. But at some point, you need to be willing to start to question, are your features even worthwhile? You need to start to move from firing just the cannonball features to using tracer bullets to start to de-risk those features. That's the whole story, and it's been the story all along. Surprising and frustrating, to be honest, that organizations settled for a feature factory. I understand why it's a checkpoint, but the fact that organizations were willing to settle for a feature factory as a place that they stay stuck in indicates that the reason that they were doing Agile to begin with was not in order to achieve agility. It was because it's the thing that you do. It's because the theater was important to them. It's because the CIO was sold on you need to do an Agile transformation. You can't really run in a waterfall organization anymore.
And I guess that goes back to who's leading the transformation, what organizations are involved in the transformation. In reality, the technology part of the company, the best they can hope to achieve is a feature factory if they haven't gotten any closer to product and marketing. If that bond is not getting closer, if that ownership's not becoming a joint extreme ownership kind of relationship, that's the only one you can achieve. So that makes some sense.
Yeah, I've seen CIOs and CTOs where when they realize that they need to become an empowered product organization, they leverage their power in the organization to drive this transformation. It's not trivial, but that's what they do. My challenge is with how many organizations I see where it's just lipstick on a pig, where they don't really care about, I don't know, to be honest, I don't know if it's that they don't care about the value that they deliver, or it's so hard for them to wield the power that is needed to drive the right transformation. A lot of this is corporate politics, and at a certain altitude, at a certain size of organization, this stuff is legitimately hard. No way around that.
And one could argue that the true creative inspired product piece might be the scariest piece of all. Back to your point about as you go from reducing waste, flow, value, I took the note. That's why I was staring at my other screen. When you talk about that lineage, and they're leading indicators of each other, right? One is a leading indicator of the other, but don't get focused on it. Otherwise, you can never achieve the next one. You mentioned, luckily, it's very difficult to measure value. And it's that leap of faith, because the better your product organization is, you'll be much better at understanding and measuring value, because that's what they're really doing. But when you don't have that strong muscle, you have to have the faith to jump into the ether. There won't be a baseline. You have to just jump in with some level of faith and try it and get a measurement, get value, then understand, even if I can't give it a number, at least be able to understand cognitively, is it getting better or worse?
I think part of the struggle with getting organizations to measure value, part of it is that it's objectively hard to measure value. Another part is that in certain cases, I would say more often than not, people are incentivized not to measure value.
It can put a flashlight on things that aren't always pretty.
It's very comfortable for the sales organization to not close the loop on whether that deal that they promised, if we build a certain feature, actually deliver that deal.
Agreed.
So getting an organization to be accountable to its hypothesis, to its assertions about value, that's risky territory for many people.
It is. It took me, I believe, exactly 1 year of being a senior manager in IT, maybe even less than 1 year. It took me like exactly 1 year going from the business product side to IT to stand up in a meeting and say, hold on a second, you didn't ask for that. That's an enhancement. That's not a bug. And it took me months to go, I can't believe that was me. Come on, the former me would be really mad. But you're right. From a technology perspective, we do measure success. Hold on a second. What you asked for, I gave you. Right? And we did implement a lot of Agile. That was actually my first project where Agile came to life. Literally, a developer forced me into it. Said, hey, how about instead of you just giving me all these things, why don't we do one thing in the morning and make sure it works before we go to lunch? We were doing 4-hour sprints, which I didn't know at the time, but we really were. And yeah, it doesn't take long from a technology side to realize you're measured on specific things. And in lieu of value, it's generally scope and time. Heck, sometimes quality falls out the window of the iron triangle because scope and time are so critical and are watched by so many people. And hey, quality? We could argue bug versus enhancement. I can get around that conversation without even trying to be nefarious. It's just, but I'm measured on time and scope. Yeah. Okay. So the other
a
thing,
lot of this, good.
No, go ahead. I just realized
one more thing, and then I have to jump to a client call in a couple of minutes. So let's have that final, close the loop, and wrap up.
I think the other thing is, you had mentioned, we're going back a couple conversations now, starting with Feature Factory first, which I'm still processing. You mentioned that sprint boundaries. What drives us to try to align on sprint boundaries where Kanban has a little bit less of that? And that made me think back to the feature factories I've been a part of. The end of sprint is also when they compile code, like every 2 weeks. And so if you are a true feature factory, you probably don't have 2-week code compiles. You've evolved past, I should say, those DevOps restrictions or those continuous flow restrictions, which gives you that platform to now get creative. And okay, if we think this thing's going to take 3 weeks as opposed to 2, what's the difference if I don't have to put that code on the shelf for a week to wait for the next time code gets compiled in System 4? Even if this other system's every day, it doesn't matter. Well, we're moving at the speed of the slowest one. So that's another element of why we have to put some of these structures in place along the way.
Yeah. It's like a Maslow hierarchy of needs. A feature factory is below being an empowered product organization. Low, it needs to be there before you can start talking about empowerment and value orientation.
I like it. I appreciate you put this together. I appreciate you setting this up, and I appreciate your LinkedIn posts. I feel like you're bringing attention to something. It's that Venn diagram. And I think product and scaling, safe, and I think they have so much more overlap than they have things that they're at odds about. So appreciate you putting those together.